and it just, and I think all those like bad feelings just came crashing down on me. Um, like a 1,000-pound anvil. And, and one day I was driving, back home from a meeting, and I just like, I was like crying in my car. I had no idea why I was like, I couldn't say why. I just felt sad. I just didn't feel right.
Hey guys, I'll make this short and sweet. This is part 2 of my conversation with Ryan Bosler. If you haven't already, go back and check out the first part and the first deployment. We're headed back now for a second tour. New father of 2, new husband, headed back to Iraq again. And this time things definitely do not go as planned. And please, 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 if you find this relatable or helpful at all, don't forget to like, subscribe, review, and shout it out on social media. You literally could be making a huge impact on someone else's life and their family, their future family, by making hope, healing, and peace more available to them through these stories. All right, let's jump right back in.
Yeah, it was actually, so specifically it was 18 months.
18 months, I'm
sorry. Yep, no, it's okay. We had 18 months. We also had another baby during that time.
Oh, geez.
So, and she was born 6 days before I shipped out, to my second deployment.
Wow, that's you are great timing on this stuff, man. I'll tell you what.
It was interesting timing. Yeah, for sure. So I think that in and of itself was an obvious marked difference of going the second time. Is that now I had been a father and a husband. We had been together that entire 18 months, and at least as much as you can try to have a little bit of normalcy in the Army life, we had some of that. So I think that was that was weighing on me, for the first time, and just in a different way. And but I still kind of felt like I had this incredible faith that was on fire, and I was, you
were going to convert all of Iraq to Christianity.
I was gonna lead, at least probably 90% of Islam to
Very
Christianity.
Nice. Very nice.
During that, I was just going to start small, but maybe just 90%.
Yeah.
And
goals.
And
sure.
Yep, goals. You got to have goals. And we ended up being sent to Baghdad this time, and the territory that we were assigned to, patrol and to be responsible for, just turned out to be a really, really bad place. And so, that kind of that vision of
that fire went out real quick.
Yeah. Huh? It went out so quick that it was like, within the first week of us being there, when we were transitioning with the unit that was on the ground at the time, and when we got there, it was a National Guard unit out of Georgia, and they had taken a number of casualties, and these I know they were signed up, for service, just like anyone else to some degree, but that was not what they did, full time. And so they told us when we got on the ground and we were going over, the map of the area of responsibility that we were taking on from them, and they they showed us this line on the map, and they said, we don't. Or they explained everything, kind of above the line, and immediately our commander said, "Well, okay, well, what about everything below this line?" And they said, "Well, we don't go down there." And it's like, well, that how can you
there's a reason they don't go
how,
down there.
how can you not go down there? Like
Right.
that was foreign in our world. And they had said, we just, we suffered too many casualties, and we just weren't going to do it. And whether it was a good decision or bad decision or just the reality of what it was, I mean, immediately our commander said, like, no, we're going down there tomorrow,
Wow.
and you're going to take us down there. You're going to show us. And unfortunately, we lost 4 soldiers.
Wow.
That day alone. And so that was definitely the um, the wake up call that it was very different. Even than
Were you there during the time where you were in? I'm assuming there's a firefight. There's an IED. There's something that when you lose those 4 soldiers.
no, that it was a different no, it was a different group of ours that went down on that one. We had we were all going to different parts of the territory at the same time, and um, I was not on that one. I knew all the guys.
Right.
I knew all the guys, and in fact I had moved to a different company. By that time I had become a captain, and I was no longer a platoon leader. On the front line, with soldiers. I was a company executive officer, so I was the second in command of the company, which, I mean, it meant that I definitely had eventually a more behind the scenes role than I did, previously day to day, being out there in operations. But for those first couple months, we were all out there, patrolling and everything. So no, I wasn't down there in their section, when that happened, but that was the wake up call that, that was going to be a lot different. And it just, unfortunately, it just got worse from there. Um, and this time around in our, our brigade of, what would have been, 1,000 plus, a couple thousand, soldiers. We had suffered the most casualties in a single deployment, um, of any unit to date at that time. And I mean, and it was still pretty early on, but
Wow.
eventually the media, started to get hold of, some of the things that was going on down there, and had affectionately, called our territory the Triangle of Death. To put in perspective the kind of place that it was, it was not a it was not a friendly environment. And so I think that just you know kind of sent me spinning.
Is there
That
maybe one impactful moment that you could share during that time, or that really had
well,
the biggest impact?
yeah, I mean, it was. I mean, it was certainly the buildup of, you know the casualties that we were sustaining, and just the constant operation, that, like, the op tempo was so high, much more so, than the first time. And 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 now, unlike the first time that I was there, when I was the new guy and I didn't know anybody, I knew the guys that I was living with, and but I didn't necessarily know the bigger unit. if you will. Um, but by this point, I was one of the most experienced officers, and so I knew everybody. So even if they weren't, on the same patrol as me at the time, when it happened, by and large, I knew all the guys that were either killed or they were injured and, had to be sent back. And so there was just kind of this slow buildup of, frustration and anger and,
Were
and
there
just,
questions? Were there questions with that new faith, obviously, of God, of I'm seeing all this death, I'm seeing all this destruction, I'm seeing all this happening around me, and I had this newfound faith that, was on fire. I was all about it. And then it's like, how in the world how do I reconcile this, I guess?
I think that, the way that I felt at the time was that I felt really let down, that like my like like my faith, at least very temporarily, was on fire, and I felt like everything was right in the world, and in life, it just made sense. And even, I mean, I joke about, I'm gonna go to Iraq, and I'm gonna this is gonna be like some kind of incredible, missionary
Transformation, yeah.
journey, everything. And it was just like so many bad things started happening, and I'm just like, man, like, God, like what are you doing? This doesn't make sense. Like it, and I still, very immature, in my faith and in my understanding. I didn't think that I was. I mean, I thought, oh man, like I kind of know some stuff,
Yeah.
and 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 so I'm like, like this isn't how it's supposed to work. Like good things are supposed to happen now, and and not only are good things not happening, but this is going terrible. Like this is this is not what I imagined it would be. I mean, I certainly understood, the risk of combat, very well. I didn't have any, you know, I didn't have any doubts about that. But I just think that just felt like God wasn't like keeping up his end of the bargain of, you're supposed to make, my life better, and the people around me, and I'm not doing better. Like I'm definitely not feeling better. Certainly not helping the people around me.
And you're a
And
new father again, right? I mean, there's got to be a
yeah,
worry in the back of your mind, like, hey, I might not be coming back this time. Was there any kind of thoughts of that? I'm assuming.
yeah, I think, yeah, I think that was, I mean, that, that it was definitely a change, and it took me a lot of years after to be able to get to the point where, like, I could admit that, you know I really, I really wasn't the same. um I really wasn't the same person. I really wasn't the same leader that I felt like I was the first time. just and again, and I know some of it is just the immaturity of a 23 year old kid, but you kind of have that feeling of invincibility, and that you don't think about the risks or anything like that. You just you just do it, and I mean, and don't you just don't put a lot of thought. There were a couple of moments, that got, a little bit of hairy, where if, where the fear sets in and the adrenaline is really pumping, and but then it's over, and it goes back to normal. But the second time, it hit a lot harder, and I can look back and say, man, like I felt more scared. I felt more, um more of that sense of, man, am I gonna make it back? Like, is, what happens? Because I'm also I'm seeing these guys that I know get killed, and I also know their families, so I'm like, they don't have a husband or a dad anymore, and it just and all of a sudden, um, I would be out on a patrol, and in a vehicle, and what's terrible about Baghdad is there's these big long reeds everywhere, and canals that line the roads, just all kinds of opportunities for uh, explosives and ambushes and everything, and we would we would take a turn down, go to take a turn, and it'd be like, ooh,
Just
I
wait
don't know,
for
like
it.
this, like this, yeah,
Yeah.
I think this is gonna hurt,
Right.
it just, and I just, and that never happened before. And it took me a long time to admit that I actually felt different. Um, but the moment that really stands out, that I think, um, you know, was the darkest time, from a faith standpoint, was um, was a, a group of soldiers that I used to lead, um, the first time that we were in Iraq, when I was their platoon leader. And again, I had moved on. I was with a different company. I was no longer, in charge of them. Um, but I think that but I was still close to him. We had a camaraderie, and I it completely undeserved on my part, but I had I had a little bit of sense of pride that you know that nobody was killed or injured, during my time with them. And again, I'm sure that just wasn't, my doing. A lot of luck and everything goes into that. But maybe halfway in or so, um, the soldiers that I had, came under ambush, and and three of them were killed, and a couple others, were injured, pretty bad. And by the time it happened fast, and they got out and got back, to the, um, to where they were living, and so I was able to get out there, for when they came back. I was like, man, I couldn't get out there to where they were when it happened, because it happened so fast and they got out, but I can at least meet them, to be there, for them when they got back. And, you know, obviously they were, they were upset, and, confused and angry, and all this stuff. And, and I, and I was too, but on the one hand, like, I know deep down, there was this part of me that, like, I had just experienced, like, a faith conversion, and it was real and it was meaningful to me, and that I had this hope, even though, like, in that moment I did, but deep down, like, I had a hope that I could share with them. And in that moment, I could console them, and I could encourage them, and I could share that hope. And, and I was just so, like, lost in my own, grief, and seeing them hurting and upset, that, like, I couldn't, like, I couldn't do it. I couldn't, Like I couldn't, and I'm embarrassed, to say it, but like the only thing that I could say to them, like this, what is now like supposedly a Christian guy, in my very pathetic attempt to comfort them, is going to each of them and hugging them and whispering in their ear, we're going to kill them all. We're going to kill them all. And that was all I had, and I hate that I did that, but, I think that was just like, that was just where I was. It was just kind of like a breaking point, for me. And, and I think once that happened, um, I just like, I don't want to be there anymore. I was, for probably the only time ever, was counting the days to just get out of there. I knew, probably by that point that most likely I was not going to stay in the Army. Um, it it definitely became clear that uh, the Iraq War, what at the time was, Operation Iraqi Freedom, was not going to end anytime soon, and it was made very clear to me that, you know I was, because of my skill set and my position, that I was going to keep going back, time and time again. And I was like, man, I'm done with that. I can do something else. I don't need this anymore. Um, and so that was a breaking point for me.
How
That
many, at that point, how much time did you have left before your second deployment would have been over?
I probably had about maybe 3 or 4 months or so,
Oh, so still quite a
before, about
while.
3 months. Yeah, probably about 3 months. I went back when I went back. I went back a little early. I went back just a little earlier than the rest of my unit went back, because the um, officer that was handling what we would call rear detachment, but was the officer in charge back home at the unit, sending guys back and forth, and all that kind of stuff, was being reassigned to go to um, special forces school, Green Berets. He had gotten a slot to go to Green Berets, and they approached me and said, you know, and I had told them, by that point I was going to get out. It was a known thing. And they said, would you be willing to, go back and replace this guy, and kind of handle the rest, and, until we get back. And I said, yeah. And so then I left.
Gotcha. Okay. So you're out, coming back to the States. You've been through all that. Take me through kind of a reacclimation period, reacclimation with wife, reacclimation with maybe faith, reacclimation with society, normal, safe society, not having to be hypervigilant anymore. What does that look like coming back?
Yeah. I mean, it was a train wreck, coming back, um, you know, because what I didn't know at the time, I mean, I knew the operations of what they did back home, kind of sending guys back and forth, and, all that stuff or whatever. But I mean, what they what they didn't, say to me at the time was like, hey, once you get back, you're also going to be the unit's liaison for all of our soldiers that were killed, their families,
Oh boy.
and, making sure that they have, you know, everything that they need, and the benefits, and, things that the Army, provides in a good way. But it was like, man, I couldn't get away from, the death and
Yeah.
the sadness. It was, and in fact, it was just being put, right in the middle of it. And, it just honestly, I mean, it was just terrible. Because understandably the families are, you know, heartbroken and shattered and upset, and you just are there, you know listening to it and trying to help, walk with them, which again, I mean, could have been a great opportunity to, to minister to people. And I mean, even though there was obviously, like, I was in the Army, and I couldn't just, say, hey, well, why don't we go to church, or let me talk to you
Right.
about Jesus. I mean, it doesn't work that way. But I certainly could have done a lot of things that were, quite frankly, the furthest from my mind, and was just so, lost in my own, anger and grief and all that, I, immediately just started, drinking a lot. And, then started taking all kinds of medications that, they would say, hey, maybe you're depressed, so, take that, take some of that, and here's, some things for anxiety, and you can't sleep, so here's, some stuff to help you sleep. And, um, you've got some aches and pains or whatever, and, you could, throw in, maybe some oxy, and it was just nonstop of any, type of cocktail, that I could come up with, that, just unfortunately set me down a really, bad, trajectory to, finish out, my time in the Army, and then, just stay addicted to all of that stuff as I, tried to, begin my new life, as a civilian. And
As
it
a
was just,
father and husband,
yeah,
and
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, as a father. And I mean, that was just, by that point, we had, we had moved, we had moved houses. And so, in the town, that we lived in. But needless to say, we were no longer we were no longer close to the church, that
Right.
where, we met Jesus,
Yeah.
and these people that guided us, and that I'm, always grateful to. Um and Amber had said, hey, that, there's this other church, that's closer by, and, we should go try that. And I don't want to have anything to do with it.
Well,
But
that was going to be my question. So you have all of these coping mechanisms with substances and pills, and was there any kind of spiritual pillar in there that you brought back or started with, or that kind of was out the window at this point?
no, I don't want to have anything to do with it. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to have anything to do with church or anything else. Um, and I just went. I mean, I eventually agreed to go. I mean,
With
she
Amber
had
when she
gone
asked.
with
Yeah.
Amber, really just because I wanted her to stop asking. And I
Yeah.
and I stayed and I stayed in the back. And the very, like, first couple of weeks that I sat down in the back, I would just sweat profusely, because I was so uncomfortable, being there. But I went. that was that was, I mean,
First
that,
step. Yeah.
that was, that was a step. And beyond, the pills and the drinking, um, you know, what I had to do, because I took a job for the first time, and it was a lot of work, to get started. I just threw myself in that and spent all my time doing that. So I mean, also too, if I could figure out a way to, sometimes be able to work on a Sunday, so that I didn't have to go to church,
Yeah.
then I would do that. But I worked, all the time, nonstop, to, and in some ways just to try to make it happen. But but I think that it really all came to a head for me about 6 months after I left the army, because I had I had gotten past survival mode in my job, and it was that that first time that it was very clear that I was going to make it, and I didn't have to quite struggle so much, and that it was going to work out. Probably. I mean, you never know, but it seemed like it was going to work out, and I think, what happened was, then I had the I had the headspace to just start thinking more, and it just and I think all those, like, bad feelings just came crashing down on me, um like a 1,000-pound anvil. And um and one day I was driving, back home from a meeting, and I just, like, I I I was, like, crying in my car. I had no idea why I was like, I just, I couldn't I couldn't say why. I just felt sad. I just didn't feel right. And there was just something inside of me that, like, said, like, I need to go see the guy who was my first pastor, that led us to Christ. And so I just drove to his house, and just
Well,
showed
you're
up.
not close to him at that point, right? You moved
No,
away. Like,
no, I hadn't talked to him in,
well, I meant distance
a couple of
wise. Like when
years.
you say
No, I wasn't.
drive,
Yeah, no, I wasn't anywhere near. I actually called him on the way and said, "Hey, I'm in the neighborhood, and I just thought I'd stop by." And it was a complete lie, because I was literally like an hour and a half away, nowhere near. But I just needed it. Like, I just felt something in me that I needed to drive there, and I met with him, and it was really kind of like this starting point of a healing process when I met with him. And it's funny because, he and I mean, like, we also, like, still keep in touch, because he's a big part of my faith story. And neither of us can really remember, like, a whole lot about what we talked about, even though I was there for quite a while. But the gist of it was, something along the lines of, um, like, it's okay if you don't feel like you love God, or even like God. Um, he loves you, and in in your faith as a believer, um, thankfully, is not based on how well you love God or don't love God. It's based on who He is, and His love and His faithfulness. And and that, I don't know, that it just kind of it just stuck with me. And it was kind of like, um, it was almost like a permission to be like, man, God, I don't want to have anything to do with you. I don't um, trust you. I, I feel completely let down. Um, but you know, you're faithful. And I believe that, I respect that. I respect authority. I do believe, despite everything, that you're God and I'm not. And if what I'm hearing is that um, it's your strength and faithfulness that matters much more than mine, then it's not really about me. And maybe over time I can learn to rely on that and trust in that more so than I certainly do now. And so I kind of took that and slowly started to get a little bit more involved in the church that we were at the time. And for the very first time, was invited to a small group, with couples. And it was actually the lead pastor of our church at the time, who was our small group leader, that invited us. And you know, months later, I had asked him. I said I had never talked to him. I ran into him at our community swimming pool one day when he invited Amber to join their group, and I said I'm just curious why you came up to us and had been never met. You asked us to join your small group. Why was that? And he said, he's like, oh man, like I saw you had a tattoo and it looked pretty cool, and I just thought, man, I like to talk to that guy, and that was how it started, you know. Um, but out of like that time with that group, and I never really, talked a whole lot. I started to get to I started to meet a few other guys in our church, and they they invited me to come to. It was kind of weird. It was almost like a business leaders breakfast Bible study kind of thing. And I mean, it was fine. Like it, but I remember when I showed up, they were, no, I can't make this up. They were reading a book that was like the management principles of Jesus. It was super weird.
Well, feel
And
comfortable, because that's part of why we're doing this, is because first
yeah,
responders, at least the ones I've talked to, think about church, Christians, spiritual people as super weird. So that's
yeah,
that's kind of why we're here.
I felt totally out of place. And I'm like, man, I know, I totally have this respect for Jesus, and I certainly don't don't have my own spirituality, figured out. But I'm like, man, I don't know if Jesus is really all about like management principles. So it didn't land all that well with me. But I got to know some really nice guys, that were in it. And so fast forward, like, maybe a month or two later, and a couple of guys had said to me, hey, we're gonna um, we're gonna head down to Nashville, like, right now. We heard about this men's group that they have going on at this one church. Nashville is like an hour away from our town, and they said, we heard like about this men's group that meets down there, and it sounds really interesting. So um, we called the guys up, and they said, just come, why don't you guys just come down and check it out? So we're going to go right now. um, do you want to come with us? And I'm like, I mean, I actually can. I didn't have anything, pressing that I had to get to. Like I wanted to have an excuse of like,
You could
no,
have just
man, I
said, "Dude,
gotta.
I think you guys are super weird." I mean, that
Yeah. I want to come up with something that I say that I have that I can't do it. But it would have been a lie, and it was like at least one moment where I thought I probably shouldn't tell a lie.
God gave you
And
no excuses, huh?
yeah, it was like no excuses. And so I said, cool, I'll go down with you guys. And man, it was one of the most incredible things that I've ever seen when I showed up and we sat down and there was like a couple hundred guys meeting in this like barn warehouse thing or whatever, and a bunch of tables and all these, guys sitting around tables, a bunch of different tables, and they had like a this guy's speaking or whatever. And then, and it was really interesting. And then afterwards, they were talking, in their table, group, whatever you want to call it. And the guys were just like they were just super honest and transparent, and it seemed like they were just like getting down to like real life issues of some things about their marriage and some struggles that they had, like pornography and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, man, I have never, ever like heard guys talk about that. I mean, especially like to other guys.
Not the stuff we
And
talk about on Sunday mornings, I'm assuming.
not the stuff that I had ever heard,
Right.
on a Sunday morning like that. And so we stayed and we talked to the guys afterwards who ran it, and they told us, hey, it's this program, curriculum called Men's Fraternity, and here's the information on it. You could go check it out. And we're driving back, from Nashville, and the three of us, that went down, we're like, man, like we need to do this. Like let's just do it. And so we got a group of guys together that summer, and we felt like if we're gonna like we want to do it and maybe try to invite other guys, like this would, I think, like other guys would find this really interesting and impactful, but maybe we should go through it first to find out what's it all about. And it was a lot of the guys that were going to this breakfast thing, that that we were doing beforehand. And I remember like 3 weeks into us meeting as a small group doing the men's fraternity curriculum, it come to find out, I mean, we had like 12 guys in there, and I come to find out like four guys, I think, were like literally in the process of going through a divorce or about to go through a divorce. And I'm like, dude, we've been meeting for like 6 some odd months, and this never came up. Like you never, like it just, and so all
Surprise.
that to say,
yeah,
surprise. Like all that to say, it was like, it seemed like it was providing this atmosphere for guys to open up and get real, and that it was in a safe, disarming environment. And so when we said, this has been so amazing for us doing it, let's invite a bunch of other guys, then there was this weird moment of like, well, who's gonna be in charge of it? And they even and they said, well, Ryan, why don't you be in charge? And I'm like, I'm the newest guy here, and I've just started going to this church, and I don't really know anybody, and I certainly don't feel equipped, to do that, because not necessarily okay in my own life right now. And I talked to my, at the time, small group leader who also happened to be my pastor. And I'm like, these guys, they want to do this Bible study. We want to invite a bunch of guys, and I think it's going to be really good. But then they said to me, like, Ryan, why don't you lead it? And I was like, why would you do that? I don't feel equipped or whatever. And he just looked at me and he was like, well, I guess it's time for you to step up. And then he just walked away from me. And I'm like, what the heck was that? Like, no explanation, no, like, hey, let's talk about it. Let's, how are you feeling or whatever. Just said, well, it looks like it's time for you to step up. And then he walked away from me. And I think that really pissed me off, that I'm like, I don't like,
Step
I
up.
mean,
Like, I don't even have my own stuff
yeah,
together. Right.
I know,
Yeah.
it's like, it was just like, I mean, so much for like spiritual guidance,
Yeah.
you're like a pastor, whatever. And that was it. And so in this really probably like twisted way, I was just like, well, I mean, I could step up. I mean, who you
I'll
think
show
you're
you what I
talking
can
to? Like,
do.
what?
Yeah.
I was like, what? It was, I could step up, whatever.
I've been to Army Ranger
And
school, baby. Let's go.
yeah, and so, man, it was pretty incredible. We all started to invite some guys, um, to do it, to come, try this new group. And I think the first day that we started, we had like 75 guys show up. And um and and it was interesting because, some of the people that I talked to before that, they had said, you're never going to get a bunch of guys to show up in a room and definitely to like open up and have like deep and real conversations,
Yeah.
like women do that, like every church. And I mean, this is, and we were in the Bible Belt of the United States, had thriving women's ministries. And for guys, it was like a, Sunday morning prayer breakfast, once a month.
Right.
Other than this church that we visited, which is why it just seems so unique to me.
This men's fraternity, speaking of guys, how many guys that you knew that were part of that, was there anybody who had a first responder profession that was in that at all? Besides you, obviously?
Yeah, there was, because at that time, we were still living in a military town.
Oh,
So
I
there,
see.
so
Yep.
there was a number of, military guys. And and then we had a few police officers as well. We did not have any firefighters, but we had a few police officers as well. And then, just guys that, um, guys that we knew. And I was actually really passionate about it not being a church thing. So we didn't meet at our church. We met at we met at like this lodge. And we didn't have it attached to do anything with our church. And we just tried to invite guys that, didn't go to church. And I mean, and it was a mix. I mean, there were guys who, had some background in church or went to our church, but there were also a lot of guys that didn't. And um, and just to see them, start to like talk about faith, for the first time ever, and to hear a message that was a little bit more tailored towards guys and what they dealt with, and not, um, I don't want to say it, too harshly, but kind of a wimpy message, or, everything about, peace, love, and teddy bears and whatever, but that, real stuff that guys dealt with. And no different than what we saw happen in Nashville, and what we experienced in our, small group when we tested it out, it wasn't but a couple weeks in that these guys were just like, vomiting emotions and feelings, and all of a sudden I'm like, man, what is going on? And it was just such an incredible, experience that really like guys were showing up to this thing and having these very not surface level conversations that I had experience in the church, of
Right.
how you doing this morning, brother?
Good, great,
Doing
fine.
great, doing
Yeah.
great, fine. Um,
So
there's
this
none of
this this men's fraternity stepping up, taking this leadership role is all part of your process as well to kind of come back to faith, come back to healing, and kind of move forward as you're back in the States now and moving on from the Army, I'm assuming.
well, what it was in particular was, you know, a, like a personal accountability, a personal and a social accountability that I was the one in charge of these guys, and the leaders and some of these other guys that were looking up to me, and it was kind of the first moment where I thought, I don't want to be a train wreck anymore. you know, um, I think that it inspired me to like want to figure out what was going on, you know, in my own life, and why I constantly felt the need to escape and not not remember, you know, some of the things that happen, and to try to reconcile them in a healthy way. And so that was one of the first times, through that, where I started to do a little bit of counseling, to talk through, some of it. Um, and amazingly, one of the other men that was part of our ministry was a family physician, and just great guy, an older gentleman, and he befriended me, and really was a mentor, but also I had never had a doctor before, and so I trusted him, and uh, f- you know eventually kind of worked up the nerve to go meet with him as a doctor, and just you know hand him all of the stuff I was taking, and say, I don't know how to not do this, and but I don't want to, and he was great. He said, you are probably taking enough different medications to tranquilize a horse right now, but it's going to take some time. But I think we can, slowly, get you off of you know a lot of this, and that was, kind of spent the next year, working on that, from a health standpoint, with him. It was a huge blessing, along with, kind of this newfound sense of purpose of what I lost in leaving the army was the positive side of it, this camaraderie and this brotherhood, and that meant everything, to me. I love that, and I love leading that, even if there was times that I wasn't very good at it, and to have kind of a new sense of purpose of leading men in a different way that still, in some ways, not just, filled that void, um, but then added the spiritual side of it, in a completely different way, than I was used to, and I felt like in some ways, um, like God was using that to help me experience, some forgiveness, even to myself. I mean, not I don't doubt that, I don't doubt God's forgiveness in it, but for my own forgiveness to be able to get past the feelings that I had in combat, that now I had this opportunity, to impact men, for the gospel, and to be able to lead them, and they just kept coming, and it just kept growing. And then I slowly started to get off, the medications, um, and my, drinking, slowed down, considerably. And it felt like I had these moments where, um, my life started to make sense a little bit more, and I didn't feel, so angry all the time, and so suspicious of of everybody around me that were perfectly normal, good people, but just assuming that they probably weren't. and and that was extremely healing, um, to be able to kind of have that new chapter. And that's kind of been, you know even after we moved from Tennessee, to Ohio, and started in, a new church. Like, for me, that was like, priority number one is, hey, can we do that again? Like, can we get something like that started? Um, because I need it. Like, I certainly wanted it for other people, but really, I needed it, like, for myself, selfishly. And I feel like that is what had helped me, um, you know, keep my life focused.
Been there, done that, gone through it, come back out the other side. What would you say to someone who is where you used to be, someone who has been through whatever, whether it be in fire, whether it be in law enforcement, whether it be out of the military, and they are struggling with thoughts, memories, alcohol, coping skills that aren't skills and are actually just doing them more harm than good? Is there a first step that you would recommend, whether that was reaching out to God, wherever they're at, whether that's reaching out to a friend? What's the first thing, if they have nothing else and they're kind of in that desperation moment, having been there, you would recommend?
Yeah, as much as I wish that I could say, reach out to God, because He's always there, and I do wholeheartedly believe that to be true. That just never worked for me personally. I felt, at least in the darkest times, that God was completely silent and absent. And biblically speaking, I know that that is not true, but I can't admit that was my, real experience. And so what helped me be able to start to take steps in healing was to talk about it with, with a friend, somebody, in a couple people, but that I trusted. And I think part of, and I waited, too long, to do that because I made the assumption that it needed to be somebody that had my exact shared background and experience, meaning somebody from the army, that had been in combat, or somebody that had been, had but also, seen combat, or those kind of things. Like, it had to be like this really specific type of individual, because they were the only ones that would really be able to relate. And and the funny thing is that I was really wrong about that, because one of the very first conversations that I had was just with a guy that I knew, and he had been asking me a few questions, um, about some of my experiences, which to some degree I would either not answer previously, or I would, or at least give pretty short general responses. And I don't know exactly why I did it that day, but for the first time I just kind of opened up about some of the things that even we were talking about earlier. And um and it was just it was and it was really um a moment where I realized, like, hey, um it's okay to talk to this guy, and because he's a human being, and he also has emotions and feelings and in life experiences that may not match up at all, the same as mine. um, just because of the fact that he's a pretty good friend and a good guy, somebody that I knew I could trust, it was actually really helpful. And and so I was actually like a little bit inspired after that first conversation. And then I actually reached out to him again and said, hey man, like, I just kind of enjoyed that that conversation. You want to get together for coffee again? And I didn't just like put everything out there, but that was really the first step in
It just kind of got that
in
snowball rolling a little bit.
in a snowball. And I mean, and I would say certainly, there have also been times where it has been helpful, to talk to a few people, that have a similar background. I mean, especially as I still keep in touch with some of my soldiers, and and people I serve with, and that's helpful. um but it ended up being like just fine, talking to a
Right.
trusted friend, and like somebody who you may believe to be a good listener. And if it turns out that they're not, then okay, so be it. Like, we meet people all the time that we don't gel with, real well, or you have a conversation, it's just kind of like,
Yeah.
that was okay. But the encouragement, that I would give based on my experience was, to give people a chance to to be a good friend, to you. And I don't and I don't take anything away from professional counseling, or Christian counseling, because I've also done a lot of that, and it's been extremely helpful. But I think that as I've looked back on my life, the times where I've sought that out, um, for the most part, also corresponded with times in my life where I had pulled away from a lot of my friends and people that I normally trust or would open up to. And then the counselor, in a positive way. I mean, it's there for, becomes a trusted safe space that their job is to listen. But I've found in my life, and I'm very grateful, like a lot of people that will listen, and they don't always need that. They don't always need to give you the answer of what you should do next. Because then I do believe that is where the Holy Spirit has the space to step in and help, guide you. But just having that trusted friend of an empathetic listener, that doesn't judge you or make you feel weird or unchristian or a bad person, even if you're talking about bad things, has been so incredible in my life. And that's and even now, having I'd like to believe, reconciled a lot of my past, of still remembering that lesson of, man, when I'm feeling some things, like, it's okay to just, talk to a buddy.
Very nice. Okay. Well, I do have one last question, and I don't know if you'd be open to this or not, but just in that whole background and story and history there, I'm curious, you think Amber would ever talk to us about her perspective on her side of things as she was watching this kind of unfold from across the sea and with new kids and all that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
she really does a phenomenal job of, you know, talking through, where she was at, from a faith standpoint, um, on the other side of, our married relationship,
Yeah.
as I was either gone, and where she was, home, and having to, deal with, two, babies, at the same time, and some of the, the struggles, that she had, and the incredible support network that we had at the time, with that first church, and with some family members and some friends, to help her through that. But then also, being part of, me coming back, at least a second time, and
Yeah.
not wanting to have anything to do with it, because that definitely was, one of the very few distinct, breaks in our what is normally a relatively similar faith journey of taking steps in a similar manner. That it was really her faith and her encouragement of, still wanting to be involved, and pushing me in a positive way,
Yeah.
to not give up. So yeah.
All right. Well, you mentioned that to her, and I'll be in touch, and we'll see if she says yes.
Okay.
All right, man.
Happy
Well,
to.
I appreciate it. Again, this is Ryan Bosler. We appreciate your time this evening, and we'll see what Amber says, and maybe we'll bring you both back on at some point and see where that goes.
Great.
All right, guys, that was Ryan Bosler, and thanks again to him for taking the time to be authentic and honest and hang out with us for a bit. Hopefully it was helpful to you in some way, and if it was, would you take a second and just leave a review, subscribe, even shout it out on social media? You could literally be saving lives and families by inviting others to hope, healing, and peace simply by doing those things and making this more available. Hey, if you have experienced an invite to peace or have a topic or combo that you'd like to share and think would be helpful, hit me up, chad.campese@gmail.com, chad.campese@gmail.com. I'd love to talk to you and maybe even bring you on. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn and Facebook. Hey, next time we have Scott Geiselhart. He is a father, a business owner, a 20-year veteran of the Frazee Fire Department, and we talk PTSD, drug addiction, suicide attempts, all with some godly intervention there at the end to bring him back on track and give him an invite to peace. All right, guys, here's a clip from that next episode. And please, please don't forget, taking a spiritual approach, a spiritually focused approach to well-being will help you achieve life-altering results. All right, guys, I will catch you on the other side.
They're scared to death of me. They think I'm going to hurt them physically and kill them or what, they're scared of me. And I went down to the shop and I had to walk around the end of my desk and the gun was still laying there. And I thought to myself, I might as well just finish this. I'm too far gone. I mean, I got PTSD and I'm looking at the symptoms, but nobody even believes me. I'm trying to explain what's going on in my life and nobody's listening.